Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking on a topic that really sits at the foundation of clinical safety and, professional risk. The difference between delegating care and referring a patient.
Right.
They sound so similar, but getting them wrong can completely change your accountability.
Completely. It's a huge distinction.
So we're working directly from the recent GMC guidance, the one updated in January 2024. And our mission for you today is pretty simple. We need to get crystal clear on the definitions and, more importantly, the rules of accountability. This is all about knowing if you're retaining responsibility or if you're actually transferring it.
And that is the essential distinction, isn't it? In a system as busy and complex as the NHS, you hear these words, delegation, referral, thrown around all the time.
All the time.
But for professional standards, they couldn't be more different. If you ever found yourself in front of a GMC hearing, one of the first questions they'll ask is, was this a delegation or was this a referral? Because that answer determines who is accountable for what happened next. That line in the sand is what we really need to solidify today.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's start right at the beginning. What is the fundamental sort of official difference according to the GMC guidance?
The key thing is the level of responsibility you keep. So let's start with delegation.
Okay.
Delegation is when you ask a colleague, it could be another doctor, a PA, an assistant practitioner, to provide care or treatment on your behalf. And this is the critical bit. The delegating doctor retains overall responsibility for the patient's management. It's spelled out in the guidance, I think it's paragraph 24. You're basically extending your own capacity through someone else.
I see.
Referral, on the other hand, well, that's a transfer. You're arranging for another professional or a whole other service to take over part or maybe even all of the patient's care. This usually happens because it's a specialty thing. It's something outside your own competence. You're moving clinical responsibility to them.
So if I were to use an analogy, delegation is like me asking my junior colleague to put a cannula in because I'm tied up with an arrest next door. I'm still the consultant in charge of the patient's overall care. I've just loaned out a task.
That's a perfect way to put it.
But a referral is me saying, look, you need to see an ophthalmologist for this eye problem, and then actually making that referral. At that point, accountability for the eye issue transfers to the ophthalmology team.
That analogy perfectly captures the spirit of it. And it really, really matters because the GMC is clear. If you do it right, when you delegate or refer, you are not accountable for what that colleague or service does or doesn't do next.
That's a huge relief, but it immediately brings up a question for me. If I'm not accountable for their actions later on, what am I accountable for? It sounds a bit too easy to just say, well, I made the decision and that's it.
And that's where the rigor comes in. Your accountability lies squarely in two places: the decision itself and the process you followed.
The decision and the process.
Exactly.
Huh.
Did you make a sound professional judgment that it was safe to transfer this bit of care? And did you follow the process checking competence, communicating clearly? If you can say yes to those, you've managed your risk.
Okay, here's where the rubber meets the road. How do we make sure that decision is actually safe? Specifically around competence. I mean, the GMC can't possibly expect me to shadow a colleague for an hour before I delegate a task on a busy night shift.
You're right, they don't. The guidance understands the pressures of practice, but it sets a pretty high bar for what it calls confidence. For delegation, you must be confident that the person have the knowledge, skills, and training. And if they're less experienced, say a foundation doctor, that confidence has to be backed up. You must make sure they're adequately supervised.
So it's an active thing, not just assuming they're okay.
It's an active duty. It means giving really clear instructions and, this is important, actively encouraging them to ask questions if they're not sure.
That feels like a heavy burden on the senior doctor, but what about the other side? What if I'm the junior colleague and my senior is, a bit intimidating? What can I do if I feel a task is just beyond me?
This is a crucial point, and the guidance gives major protection here. When you accept a delegated task, your absolute priority is patient safety. That comes above everything else.
Even training opportunities.
Yes, explicitly including training or any other pressure. So if you agree at first, but then you see the patient or realize how complex it is, and you feel it's unsafe, you must seek help or ask someone more experienced to take over. That decision to say no or escalate actually overrides any previous agreement you made. The GMC fully supports that because patient safety is the trump card.
That's so important. It confirms that the professional duty to be safe is higher than any sort of hierarchical duty to just obey. Okay, let's shift to referrals. What if we're referring outside the usual regulated professions? Say, to an advanced practitioner who isn't registered with the GMC or the NMC.
The guidance covers this specifically. You're still responsible for checking it's safe. So if you refer to an unregulated service, you have to be confident that they have systems in place to check the safety and quality of their care. They actually mentioned voluntary registers, like managed voluntary registers or MVRs, as a source of assurance that they're meeting competence standards.
Oh, that's interesting. Why MVRs in particular? What makes them special?
It's because those registers usually require people to prove their competence, stick to a professional code, and they often have proper complaints procedures. So for you, the referring doctor, checking if someone's on an MVR is a concrete step. It's auditable. It shows you did your due diligence on safety. It moves your decision from just an assumption of quality to an evidence-based judgment.
Right.
And while we're on referrals, there is one absolute red line. You must not refer a patient to a medical professional, has been erased or suspended from a professional register.
A total non-negotiable.
Yes, a massive professional failure if you knowingly do that.
Okay, let's talk about communication. Transferring information is obviously key. But what about confidentiality? What exactly do we have to tell the patient, and what do we need to share with the person we're referring to?
The rules here are pretty much the same for both delegation and referral. You have to explain to the patient that someone else will be providing care, and you have to tell them why.
So transparency is key.
Totally. Is it for their expertise? Is it just for scheduling? They need to know. And then, for the information you share with the other professional, you must pass on all the relevant info. The patient's condition, their history, the reason for the transfer. If you hold back something that's critical for safe care, you're putting the patient at risk.
And this is where it can get tricky, isn't it? Patient autonomy versus safe care. What if a patient objects to me sharing a piece of their history, like a past addiction issue, with a specialist, even though I think it's essential for them to know?
One of the toughest questions in daily practice. The guidance is very clear here. First, you should check that the patient really understands what you need to share and why it's so important, the risks of not sharing it.
Right.
But if they still object to you disclosing something that you, as the clinician, consider essential for safe care, you have to explain that you cannot refer them or arrange their treatment without that specific disclosure.
Wow, that's powerful. You're essentially saying, I respect your right to refuse, but my duty to safe practice means I can't proceed without this information?
Precisely. It puts the consequence of non-disclosure back on the patient, but it ensures the doctor never helps facilitate what they know would be unsafe care, but protects everyone.
So let's bring it all together. After the handover is done, what are we, the original doctor, always on the hook for? Can you summarize those final pillars of accountability?
You're always accountable for the process. So the 4 pillars are: 1, the decision to transfer care in the first place. Was it reasonable?
Okay.
2, the instructions you gave. Were they clear and complete? 3, the steps you took to make sure patient safety wasn't compromised during that handover. And 4, if you're the responsible consultant or named clinician, you're still accountable for the overall management of the patient, even if specific tasks were delegated out.
That's a critical distinction, accountability for overall management versus the process. So even if my referral was perfect, if the patient's condition gets worse because the overall plan was flawed, that's still on me as the consultant.
Absolutely. Referring away one part of the care doesn't mean you've abdicated your role as the main planner, unless you're formally transferring the entire episode of care, like a discharge, back to a GP.
And finally, the ultimate safety net, the records. This is where you prove you did it right. What exactly do we need to write down?
Your record keeping is your defense. It has to be clear, accurate, legible, and crucially, contemporaneous.
Right at the time.
Or as soon as possible after. An entry made 6 hours after a big decision has way less weight than one made right away. And specifically for these transfers, your notes must include your findings, the plan, what you told the patient, any concerns they raised, and the decision you made, who you delegated to, and what instructions you gave.
This deep dive really shows that delegation isn't just about sharing work. It's a highly regulated, specific transfer of responsibility. It forces you to pause and justify every single step.
The key takeaway is that the safest doctor sticks rigidly to these definitions. Professional risk doesn't just come from clinical mistakes. It comes from an unclear chain of command. Knowing the difference between retaining overall management in delegation and formally transferring responsibility in a referral, that is how you manage your risk.
The entire framework seems to rest on that initial professional judgment. So final thought for you to explore. In a busy night shift, how do these clear lines of accountability change when you are delegating a complex, urgent task like managing a deteriorating patient to a colleague you've never even met before? Their competence is an unknown and you have zero time to check a register. Where does your duty shift in that high-pressure emergency? Thanks for joining us for this in-depth look at these critical GMC standards. We'll be back soon with another deep dive curated just for you.